Over the last week, there have been rumors that fanfiction.net is going to go offline forever, just disappear with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of fanfics still hosted on it to this day. And while rumors of websites disappearing aren't uncommon, like any of us who were on Tumblr in 2012 could tell you about like the 4 times that we truly thought we were done for, and then it turned out we weren't done for. But this fanfiction.net rumor feels different. Like, it feels possible. And this is partially due to the fact that fanfiction.net has a history of deleting fanfiction without any sort of warning. And there are reasons for this to make you feel anxious or worried or like a little bit sad. Like, I promise that you are not overreacting by being deeply uncomfortable with the idea of 2 decades worth of fanfiction just disappearing overnight. All of those Twitter threads telling you to log on to your old fanfiction.net account and save all of your old fic are right. They're not overreacting. The way that we interact with fanfiction, fanworks, and fandom history are still shaped by the early purges of the 2000s, and that's before you consider the fact that internet history is in a state of rapid decay, with things that happened only a few years or a decade ago rapidly becoming difficult to research or recount correctly. So yeah, saving your old fanfiction matters. It's important. Like, I swear to you that you logging onto your old account and downloading your old Twilight fanfictions really do mean something. Alright, so before we get to where we are today with Archive of Our Own and fanfiction.net, we're going to have to go back in time. We're going to have to go to a time before fanfiction.net, if you can even imagine that being possible. Most of the history I'm going to be recounting is expertly documented in Kaitlyn Tiffany's Everything I Need, I Get From You, one of my favorite books this year, and probably a source that I'm going to be citing constantly on this channel in future videos. Fandom existed before the internet, but as soon as the internet age began, fans, and fangirls in particular, were quick to establish the internet as a means of communication for fandom-specific activities, discussions, and the distribution of fan works. The most early attempts at this were through internet mailing lists, and then it turned into small forums and individual websites. Prior to the internet, most fan work was distributed through zines and other physical means of communication. I imagine that if you were a fangirl in the 1990s, the idea of your X-Files fanfiction being stored in a digital mode where there was no worry about things like water damage or just putting it in the wrong drawer was like super exciting. Like, no longer would you have to worry about physical means destroying your favorite Mulder Scully fanfiction. You could just log on to your favorite forum and it would be right there forever. That is, as long as the site was properly maintained. History lesson. The internet used to be super decentralized. The idea of large corporations like Meta owning half of the internet was decades in the future, so these sites were often moderated by just one person who was a really big fan of this thing and wanted to connect with other fans. Because there were no large corporations owning these websites and wanting to sell ad space, there was no need for monetization, because like, who the hell was going to make money off of being a fan in the first place, right? So without monetization, there was also no real need to moderate or censor anything that was being put onto the website beyond the tastes, preference, and rules of the individual moderators and owners of the site. However, this decentralization also meant that it was really easy for individual websites to just disappear. Like I said, they were typically run by an individual or a small group of people, so if the server that the website was hosted on went down, if the code was faulty, if the appropriate fees to host the website weren't paid, it would just disappear. And it would take every piece of fan work that had been stored on that website down alongside it. It was truly, truly a dark time to be a fan on the internet. And even beyond the issue of a single website just being at peril of disappearing, the decentralization meant that it was really hard to find things. Like, Google did not exist in the way that we know it today, so finding fan content was often like a bit of a lift. In 1995, Yahoo's free service GeoCities allowed for the easy access and creation of fan sites, which was particularly interesting as GeoCities had not been a free service prior to the Yahoo acquisition. While GeoCities was excellent for accessing and communicating with other fans, it was still wildly decentralized. Like, individual fandoms, sub-fandoms, fandom factions, and ships would make their own websites. So it was a little bit difficult to have multiple fandoms, like they weren't all interacting in one easy-to-access location. Enter fanfiction.net. Launched in October of 1998, which, by the way, means that I am 8 months older than fanfiction.net, and that is incredibly strange to put into perspective. Fanfiction.net allowed for the easy hosting of pretty much every fandom that you could think of in one singular website. This is an obvious upgrade over the individualized forums of the 1990s. Like, everything that you can need is on one website. Why would you hop between 5 different websites when you could just go to one and access all of the fanfiction you want at your fingertips? And it made it easier for storage because all of a sudden, you could dump all of your Star Wars, your Star Trek, your Twin Peaks, your X-Files, your Boy Wizard fic, all into one location under one username for anybody to find and access appropriately. Here's the issue. Fanfiction.net is not an archive. It was never intended to be an archive. Fanfiction.net has always been run by a singular person who's not like a particular fan of anything. And because it isn't an archive, it doesn't prioritize the storage of fics. In 2001, RPF, or Real People Fanfiction, think like stories about Larry from the One Direction fandom, was purged all of a sudden, overnight, and without any warning. Kaitlyn Tiffany interviews a fandom elder in the Beatles fandom who notes that there's no record of any Real People fic prior to their entry because it's just gone. Like, they know it exists, but there's no way to find it because it was all forcibly purged. A whole digital record, just gone. And RPF wasn't the only type of fanfiction that was at peril of being deleted. If you're familiar with fanfiction.net's history, or fandom history, or fanfiction history, or internet history, or whatever, a different purge probably came to mind just now. In 2002, only a few months after the RPF purge, fanfiction.net made the announcement that any NC-17 content, or as the kids call it, porn, would be deleted from their website without any sort of warning. And it was. As you can imagine, this was like a lot of fanfiction just deleted without any means of backing it up because a lot of people didn't store onto their computers and it was 2002, so there was not a Google Drive to just be saving your shit to. It was gone. Hours and hours of work just disappeared because some people running a website felt like it. And if you've ever written fanfiction, you know how much work that is. Hell, if you've written anything, you understand how much time and effort and care goes into writing things like this, and it was just gone. Hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of fanfictions disappeared. Entire users' works purged. Like, it actually makes me, like, really sad to think about. Of course, the ban on adult content was poorly enforced, to say the least. Like, if your first experience with, like, smut or adult content or, like, sexual content was on fanfiction.net, I need you to know that I see you and I feel you and, like, it's okay. We can all admit that. Like, I was on fanfiction.net for a while before I found out that apparently there was a ban on adult content, and I was like, are you sure? Like, are you sure about that? Because I just read like 3 different fics of Zuko and Katara getting weird at Zuko's like beach house, so are you really sure that that content doesn't exist on here? And also, for good measure, in 2012, fanfiction.net purged adult content again, but as somebody who was reading adult content way after 2012 on fanfiction.net, like, it really didn't work, but they did take out a large chunk of fics through this method. In the midst of all of this entered another fandom player, Tumblr. In a Tumblr book cultural studies scholar Milena Popova correctly identifies Tumblr as the latest home for fanworks in a long, long internet history. This is another book that you will hear me cite often on this channel. It's easy to see why Tumblr became this hub of fanfiction. It allowed not only for the easy storage of fanfiction on your own blog, but the ease at which fanworks could be spread via reblogs was unheard of up until this point. No longer did you have to copy a link to your favorite fanfiction or fan art and send it over Messenger or email to your friends. You could simply reblog it and put it on everybody's dashboard, or allow it to live forever on your blog for other people to find. And as another positive, even if the original blog that posted the fan work were to ever delete, the post would never fully go away. And if you were to delete your own blog, your work or your reblogging of it would live forever in the notes on Tumblr to be shared even once you had decided that you no longer wanted to engage, which has its pros and cons, but that's for a different video. And best of all, as the editors to a Tumblr book note in their introduction, Tumblr was famously difficult to monetize for most of its life. There were running jokes for years about how Tumblr ads were terrible and impossible to be targeted, and how any website that were to buy Tumblr would ultimately fail because, how are you going to make money off of this in the first place? So, without the need or the possibility of monetization, most content on Tumblr was allowed to exist unmoderated, untouched, and uncensored. That is, until capitalism got to Tumblr. I could do an entire video about the decline of Tumblr, how it went from the hub for online fandom and communication to a graveyard, but that is for a different video. This video is specifically about fanworks and the preservation and removal of them. Because in 2018, Verizon, the newest owners of Tumblr, realized that they could not sell ads next to porn, and so they decided to ban all adult content from the site in one fell swoop. For those unfamiliar with what this looked like, posts, primarily images, were auto-tagged as adult content and essentially hidden behind a warning that said, "This is adult content, it violates our terms of service, sorry." It was like a fogged out version of it with just that generic message over the top of it. There was an approval process that you could use to appeal it if it was incorrectly tagged, but it's Tumblr. It was like the worst maintained website known to man. Good luck getting any help from anybody. All of these works were impossible to access, and I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that possibly millions of pieces of fan work were lost through this, just hidden behind that stained glass warning. And I think that is so much worse than just the up and deletion of it, because you know it's there. You know it's right there behind that warning. At least with fanfiction.net, there was no record of it ever existing. With Tumblr, it's just there, taunting you for the rest of your life. And this censorship ultimately led to the loss of a lot of fanworks, because people, like the fanfiction writers of past, had not backed up their work anywhere else. And it had never been reposted anywhere, and now it was just stuck behind this barrier. Or the original artist had just left the site and never touched their work again, and suddenly it just sat there, decaying forever. I had stopped using Tumblr widely in about 2018, so I was off of there for the most part, but man, it made me sad, genuinely so sad to watch what I had at the time thought to be an archive of fandom just stop being that. I don't know, thinking about the decline of Tumblr is something that will never not make me sad, but thinking about what Tumblr did to the fan artists that had built it up into this hub is borderline unforgivable to me. So, what now? If you're an avid fanfiction reader, then you already know I'm going to sing praises of AO3. Archive of Our Own is an archive for all sorts of transformative work, meaning fan art, fanfiction, etc. and it's run by the nonprofit Organization for Transformative Works, whose mission statement is specifically to preserve pieces of internet history, fandom culture, fandom history, and fan works, all of which are like impossible to disconnect from themselves, and the destruction of one leads to the destruction of the other parties. AO3 is a nonprofit. It will never attempt to make money off of itself. It will never attempt to be monetized. So there are no ads, and because nobody is trying to sell ads on the website, there is no need to monetize or purge any of the works that are hosted there. Because guess what? Fanfiction.net ran ads. Fanfiction.net was for profit. Okay, you're saying, this is pretty crazy and a little bit sad, but like, it's Twilight fanfiction from 2010. Why does it matter so much if it disappears from the internet? Fandom over the last 2 decades has become remarkably important to pop culture. Real events that take place offline or important stories that take place online now have origins within fandom. However, the destruction of blogs, fanfiction, etc. has made it remarkably difficult to recount the history of some of these fairly important events that have happened, leading to a reliance on word-of-mouth memory, which oftentimes can be incredibly unreliable on the internet, leading to a game of telephone. Take, for example, My Immortal. Oh, you thought you were going to get a fanfiction.net video that didn't mention My Immortal? Oh, that's cute. For the unfamiliar, My Immortal is a piece of fanfiction that centers around Ebony Darkness Dementia Ravenway, a goth vampire who is not related to Gerard Way but attends a school for witches and wizards in England where she and her gothic friends interact with characters and elements of a story about a boy wizard. It is bad, remarkably so, and the original version of it no longer exists. See, I would love to cite some sources and tell you all about My Immortal's existence and then non-existence and then re-existence, but we simply don't have that information. While there are accounts that claim to be definitive, they are certainly well researched, but admit themselves that there are holes in the story that we just have no way to fill. For example, the final 2 chapters of the fic as we see them now might not be the final 2 chapters of the fanfiction, or they might be false, or they might have never existed as part of the fanfiction themselves, as there was a hack around that time, as oral history tells us. Hell, we don't even know who the author of the fic is, and this lack of clarity and mystery has led for many people to come forward and claim that they wrote My Immortal, to varying degrees of believability. What we do know about My Immortal is this. It was published on fanfiction.net between 2006 and 2007, and it was forcefully removed by moderators in 2008. The versions that we see now only exist because people had been copy and pasting it from the website to save it to their own devices and re-upload them. Let me break this down. My Immortal isn't even 20 years old, and we have no idea what its history is. My Immortal can't even drink in the United States, and we have no idea where it came from. There is no original record of My Immortal because it was forcefully removed by fanfiction.net moderators. Fanfiction.net currently houses hundreds of thousands of fanfictions dating back to 1999, and I promise you that most of them will not be saved in the same way My Immortal was, like a firefighter grabbing the shittiest, most embarrassing, worst family photo off of the wall before the house collapses. Like, thanks. This is something I will cherish. I appreciate having it, but out of everything you saved, did you have to save this one? I'm just kidding. I love My Immortal. I was actually Ebony Darkness Dementia Ravenway for Halloween in 2019. Another example. In Folding Ideas' 3 parts 50 Shades of Grey video series, Dan Olson reveals that he was able to get a copy of Master of the Universe, the original fanfiction form of 50 Shades of Grey, complete with author's notes intact, despite author E.L. James's best efforts to eradicate all history of 50 Shades of Grey ever existing as a fanfiction from the internet. Dan even discusses how these efforts to nuke all history of 50 Shades of fanfiction from the internet make researching the details of its origin incredibly difficult. And this has opened up space for Erica Mitchell, aka E.L. James, to twist the narrative and obscure facts until, well, it fits the one that she wants to tell people. Master of the Universe was removed from the internet 11 years ago, and we've already lost so much information. Here's another example. Did you know that Cassandra Clare, author of the Shadowhunter Chronicles, was once a huge fanfiction author with a lot of drama surrounding her? You could be forgiven if you didn't know. She went to great lengths to try and scrub this record from the internet. It didn't work. This is still a widely known fact. However, a lack of documentation has made it difficult to tell these stories without some amount of internet telephone getting in the way, some facts being dramatized and some being forgotten over the years. This means that not only is there now a gap of history surrounding the conception of 16 books and counting at the time of recording, but there is also now a gap of how fandom was shaped, because her widely influential Draco trilogy created a lot of tropes that are now commonplace within fanfiction and fandoms, and, well, it's gone. We just tell this story through word of mouth and fan wikis. Of course, like My Immortal, both Master of the Universe and the Draco trilogy have been preserved through fan efforts of saving before their deletion. And this isn't like a widespread endorsement of pirating fanfiction. I'm just pointing out how easy it is to lose pieces of fan work and fandom history without any sort of archival or saving process in place to keep these things from just disappearing from the internet entirely. We have been taught from a young age that the internet is eternal. Anything you put on there is going to stay there forever. And while this is true, digital memory does live forever, it's oftentimes obfuscated, buried, hard to find, or it just is lost to digital decay, especially when it comes to things like fan works. This isn't even confined to fan work or fan fiction. This affects real life events that are connected to the internet. Think about DashCon, right? It happened less than 10 years ago, but we've already lost so many facts of this situation. People who claim to make definitive accounts or recaps are oftentimes just working with word-of-mouth memories or rumors that have become so commonplace that they're mistaken for fact. And this game of history telephone is hilarious at times. Like, I'm a Homestuck, right? Like, ask me if any of the Homestuck legends are, like, not funny to me, because they're all hilarious, but there's an issue when that is the only account that you have to look back on for these actual events that happened. Because this game of, oh, I heard somebody say this, I heard somebody say that, and not having the source anymore, oftentimes turns fact into dramatized detail, and history stops being history and it becomes folklore instead. Preservation matters. It gives us a peek back into the internet at a certain point in time, and with how quickly the internet evolves, even 10 years ago feels like ancient history. 10 years ago, Tumblr was like the website, you know? Homestuck was all over the place. DashCon hadn't happened. Hamilton hadn't happened. All of these big things just hadn't happened yet. The attitudes in fanfiction and fan work were entirely different. The slang was different. The works written in 2012 reflect a different internet, a different fan culture, just a different point in time that is fascinating and important for understanding pop culture and history. And being able to look back matters. It matters to historians who are one day going to be studying this point in time, who need a link to understand pop culture and societal attitudes. It matters to fandom newbies who deserve to have like the ability to look back on where their fandom was, or even how fan fiction looked at the time. But most importantly, it matters to you. You made something that wasn't there before. You sat down and you wrote something. You made art. Fan fiction is art, and it doesn't matter how good it is, because art shouldn't be judged by how good something is. Like, what the fuck does that even mean? You created something. It matters, okay? Your Bleach fan fiction from 2011 fucking matters, because it is art and it is something that you created, and it deserves to be regarded with that level of respect. and it doesn't deserve to be lost to the sands of the internet because one fanfiction decided that, no, it's time to kill it without warning anybody appropriately. People in the past have not had the foresight, they have not had the warning to go and save their shit, but you do. You have the ability to go back to fanfiction.net and save everything that you have ever written because it matters to you. So if you have a fanfiction.net account, save your work. Log back in, save it. If you can't log in, copy and paste it off of the website, okay? You can save it to your computer, you can save it to your Google Drive, but if you still want it to exist online, put it on Archive of Our Own. It literally functions as an archive more than anything else, a place to just put things and store them. And if you don't want to be associated with your fic anymore, that's okay, I get it. We've all evolved over the last 10 years. You can put your fic on and then orphan it, so that there's no owner to it technically, but it still exists. I once found Star Wars fan fiction on Archive of Our Own that was from 1999. It had been moved from a barely functioning forum by somebody who recognized the importance of preserving fan works and had painstakingly moved all of these fics over. And it is one of my favorite discoveries on the site. Just that one person knew how important these fics were and had moved them to a place where they would not be at risk of disappearing forever. And like I said at the top of the video, it's not uncommon for warnings about websites going down to appear. It's kind of the name of the game being on the internet, but even if fanfiction.net doesn't disappear this time, save your work. We've seen time and time again that fanfiction.net does not care for the preservation of fan works, but you should. Save the work you love. Don't let another piece of fandom and internet history just be lost to the sands of time like they were in 2001 and 2002 and 2012, because the art that you have made, it matters. I promise you that it matters.